The Denver County Courthouse buzzed with its usual morning activity as Judge Sarah Martinez prepared for what seemed like another routine day in family court. The marble halls echoed with footsteps, whispered conversations, and the shuffling of papers. It was 9:15 a.m. on a crisp October morning, and Courtroom 304 was about to become the stage for an unexpected revelation. 7-year-old Tommy Watson sat on the hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, his small fingers nervously playing with the frayed edges of his favorite blue baseball cap. His mother, Lisa Watson, a tired-looking woman in her early 30s, kept smoothing his unruly brown hair, more to calm her own nerves than to tidy his appearance. "Remember, Tommy," Lisa whispered, kneeling to meet his eye level, "you only need to sit quietly. Everything will be okay." But Tommy's large brown eyes held a wisdom beyond his years, and a secret that weighed heavily on his small shoulders. The courthouse officer, Officer Rodriguez, emerged from the courtroom doors, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Watson custody hearing," he called out, his voice echoing through the corridor. Lisa stood, straightening her modest navy dress, and took Tommy's small hand in hers. As they entered the courtroom, Tommy's father, James Watson, was already seated at one of the tables with his attorney. He wore an expensive suit that seemed out of place given his claimed financial struggles, and his clean-cut appearance masked a darkness that only Tommy truly understood. James barely acknowledged his son's presence, too busy whispering to his lawyer and organizing papers that would supposedly prove why he deserved more custody time. Tommy's grip on his mother's hand tightened as they walked past his father's table. Judge Martinez sat high on her bench, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading through the case files with careful attention. Her reputation for being fair but firm had earned her respect throughout Denver's legal community, and today, her instincts were already telling her something was different about this case. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the formal proceedings began. Tommy watched as the adults around him stood and sat like a well-rehearsed dance. He clutched his baseball cap tighter, a gift from his grandfather that had become his security blanket over the past difficult year. The morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the room. Tommy's mother's attorney, Miss Thompson, began presenting their case, speaking about Lisa's dedication as a mother, her stable job as a nurse at Denver General Hospital, and her commitment to Tommy's education and well-being. Throughout the presentation, Tommy's eyes kept darting to the worn backpack at his feet. Inside was evidence of something that no one in the courtroom yet suspected, something that had been haunting his young mind during every weekend visit to his father's house. James Watson sat with a confident smirk, occasionally nodding to his attorney or writing notes. He had prepared well for this day, ready with explanations for his frequent business trips, the mysterious late-night visitors, and the reasons why Tommy sometimes returned from visits with unexplained anxiety. The courtroom clock ticked steadily, its sound seeming to grow louder with each passing minute. Tommy's palms began to sweat as he watched his father prepare to take the stand. He knew what would happen next. His father would tell lies, just like he always did, and paint himself as the perfect parent who deserved more time with his son. Judge Martinez observed the proceedings with careful attention, occasionally making notes and studying the body language of everyone in her courtroom. Her years of experience had taught her to notice the small details: the way Tommy flinched when his father moved, the defensive posture of Lisa Watson, and the slightly too polished appearance of James Watson. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky, and as it reached its highest point, casting a bright glare through the windows, James Watson stood to take the oath. Tommy's heart began to race. His secret felt like it was burning inside him, threatening to burst out at any moment. As the bailiff began administering the oath to James Watson, Tommy's fingers found their way to the zipper of his backpack. The truth he carried would soon change everything in courtroom 304, but for now, he sat silently, gathering the courage that no 7-year-old should ever need to have. The stage was set, the players were in position, and in just a few moments, this ordinary custody hearing would transform into something that would be remembered in the Denver County Courthouse for years to come. James Watson stood at the witness stand, his expensive suit catching the late morning light as he began weaving his carefully practiced story. His voice carried across the courtroom with calculated charm, speaking of his successful business ventures and his deep love for his son. "Your Honor," James began, straightening his silk tie, "I've always put Tommy's needs first. Every weekend he stays with me, we have quality father-son time. We play baseball, work on his homework, and I make sure he has the best of everything." Tommy's small body tensed with each word his father spoke. His mother, Lisa, noticed his fingers gripping the baseball cap so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, misinterpreting his tension as simple nervousness. Judge Martinez listened carefully, her experienced eyes noting the slight tremor in James' left hand as he gestured, a detail that seemed at odds with his confident demeanor. She had seen thousands of parents testify in her courtroom, but something about James Watson's performance felt rehearsed, too perfect. "I've recently purchased a larger house in a better school district," James continued, producing photographs of a pristine suburban home. Tommy would have his own room, a backyard to play in, and... "That's not true." The small voice cut through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Tommy had jumped to his feet, his baseball cap falling forgotten to the floor. Lisa tried to pull him back down, but Tommy stood firm, his whole body trembling. "Tommy," Judge Martinez spoke gently, leaning forward slightly, "you need to sit down, sweetheart. This isn't." "He's lying." Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "That's not where we stay when I visit. We stay in the old house with the scary basement." James's face darkened for a split second before he forced a concerned smile. "Son, you're confused. We moved from that house months ago." "No." Tommy's words tumbled out faster now, like a dam breaking. "We were there last weekend. You locked me in the basement again when your friends came over. The ones with the scary bags and the funny smell." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Judge Martinez raised her hand to stop James's attorney from objecting. She had seen the flash of fear cross James's face, not the fear of a falsely accused man, but the panic of someone whose secrets were about to be exposed. "Tommy," the judge spoke softly but firmly, "would you like to tell me more about these friends of your father's?" Lisa sat frozen, her face pale as she realized what her son had been keeping inside. Her attorney, Miss Thompson, quickly moved closer to support both mother and child. "They come at night mostly," Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger. "Dad thinks I'm sleeping, but I can hear them. They'd argue about money and packages. Sometimes they count lots of cash on the kitchen table. And there's a special room in the basement behind the old bookshelf that Dad doesn't know I found." James Watson's composed facade crumbled. He began to rise from the witness stand, his eyes darting toward the courtroom door. The bailiff moved quickly to block the exit, sensing the sudden shift in the situation. "Your Honor," James' attorney started, "clearly the child is confused and..." But Tommy wasn't finished. He reached down for his backpack with shaking hands. "I took pictures," he said, his voice small but determined, "with Mom's old phone that she gave me to play games. Dad never checks my backpack." Judge Martinez nodded to the bailiff, who carefully took the backpack and brought it to her. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she examined its contents. James Watson's face had lost all color. His attorney was frantically whispering in his ear, but he appeared not to hear a word. His eyes were fixed on his son's backpack, knowing that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Tommy stood straight, despite his trembling legs. For the first time in months, he felt the heavy weight of his secret beginning to lift. His mother wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her face as she realized the burden her little boy had been carrying alone. Judge Martinez looked up from the contents of the backpack, her expression grave. She pressed a button on her desk, and within moments, 2 court officers entered the room. The morning had started as a simple custody hearing, but it was about to become something much more significant. The truth that Tommy had bravely revealed was just the beginning. The photographs from Tommy's backpack lay spread across Judge Martinez's bench, each one telling its own disturbing story. The images, though slightly blurry and taken from a child's low angle, clearly showed what James Watson had been desperately trying to hide. "Your Honor," the court prosecutor, who had been quickly summoned to the courtroom, spoke in hushed tones as he examined the photos. "These images show significant evidence of drug manufacturing and distribution." Tommy sat closer to his mother now, his initial burst of courage giving way to exhaustion. Lisa held him tightly, her mind racing through all the weekends she had sent her son to that house, never knowing the danger he faced. "Tommy," Judge Martinez spoke gently, "can you tell us more about what happens in the basement? Take your time, sweetheart, you're very safe here." The young boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's a big metal table down there. Dad and his friends put white stuff in little bags. Sometimes they fight about money. He paused, gathering strength. When they come over, Dad locks me in the other part of the basement. He says it's for my own good, but I'm scared of the noises. James Watson, now flanked by two court officers, had lost all trace of his previous confidence. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched his son reveal the dark truth about his operation. The worst part, Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger, is when they use the special phone. Dad has 3 phones, but the black one only rings at night. When it rings, more people come, and they all go to the secret room behind the bookshelf. The prosecutor nodded grimly, making notes. Your Honor, this matches our ongoing investigation into a major drug distribution network we've been tracking. We had no idea the headquarters was in a residential home with a child present. Lisa's attorney, Miss Thompson, stood up. Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of these activities. The custody agreement meant she had no right to inspect Mr. Watson's residence. Judge Martinez raised her hand for silence. Her focus remained on Tommy, who seemed smaller in his chair but somehow stronger than before. Tommy, how did you manage to take these pictures without anyone noticing? A slight smile crossed Tommy's face for the first time that day. I pretended to play games on Mom's old phone. Dad never checks what I do because he thinks it's just a toy. But I learned how to use the camera at school, and I knew what Dad was doing was bad. The courtroom absorbed this revelation. A 7-year-old boy had accomplished what law enforcement had been trying to do for months. Suddenly, James made a desperate move. He shoved one of the court officers and lunged toward the exit. The bailiff reacted quickly, and within seconds, James Watson was face down on the courtroom floor, being handcuffed as he shouted incoherently about his rights. Tommy flinched at the commotion but didn't look away. His mother noticed a new strength in his eyes, replacing the fear that had lived there for so long. I have heard and seen enough, Judge Martinez announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. Mr. Watson will be remanded into custody immediately. The Drug Enforcement Unit is already on its way. She turned to Lisa and Tommy. Mrs. Watson, you are granted immediate full custody of Tommy. Additionally, I'm issuing an emergency protective order. The prosecutor approached Tommy and Lisa. Young man, you've just helped us crack one of the biggest drug cases in Denver's recent history. Your bravery is remarkable. Tommy looked up at his mother, seeking reassurance. She smiled through her tears, pulling him closer. I'm so sorry, baby. I had no idea, but you're safe now. You'll never have to go back there. As James Watson was led away in handcuffs, he turned one last time toward his son. But Tommy didn't cower this time. Instead, he stood up straight, still holding his mother's hand, and watched as his father was escorted out of the courtroom. Judge Martinez stepped down from her bench and approached Tommy. Sometimes the biggest heroes come in the smallest packages, she said warmly. You did the right thing today, Tommy. It took great courage to speak up. As the courtroom began to clear, Tommy picked up his baseball cap from the floor where it had fallen earlier. He placed it back on his head, no longer needing to hide behind it. The morning's events had transformed him from a frightened child keeping a terrible secret into a brave young boy who had chosen truth over fear. The worst was over, but Tommy's story was far from finished. Within an hour of Tommy's revelation, the Denver County Courthouse had transformed into a hub of intense activity. Drug enforcement agents filled the hallways, and Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, sat across from Tommy in a comfortable room specially designed for interviewing children. You've been very brave, Tommy, Detective Chen said, placing a box of colored markers and paper on the table between them. Lisa sat nearby, still processing the morning's events. Could you draw me a picture of the basement where your dad kept you? Tommy picked up a black marker and began to draw with surprising detail. His small hand moved across the paper with purpose, mapping out the layout that had been burned into his memory over countless weekends. This is the bookshelf, he explained, pointing to a rectangular shape. It looks old, but it's not real. If you push it just right, it moves. His finger traced along the paper. And here's where they keep the special boxes. They have numbers on them, and sometimes they glow in the dark. Detective Chen exchanged glances with her partner. The description matched the sophisticated tracking systems used by major drug operations. And these other rooms? She asked gently. This one is where Dad locked me. Tommy's voice grew quieter. It has a small window, but it's too high to reach, I could hear everything they said, though. I remembered the words they used because they were strange. As Tommy continued describing the operation he had unwittingly witnessed, seasoned detectives were already raiding James Watson's house. His drawings proved remarkably accurate, leading them directly to hidden compartments and sophisticated security systems. Lisa watched her son with a mixture of pride and heartache. "I should have known," she whispered to the victim advocate sitting beside her. "The nightmares, the way he'd get quiet after weekends with James. I thought it was just the divorce affecting him." "Mrs. Watson," the advocate reassured her, "you couldn't have known. Your son showed incredible wisdom in how he handled this situation." Meanwhile, Tommy had moved on to drawing the people he'd seen visiting the house. His childlike sketches included specific details that made the detectives lean forward with interest. A distinctive tattoo on one man's neck, another's unusual limp, the car with the broken taillight that came every Tuesday night. "Tommy," Detective Chen said, studying the drawings, "you have an amazing memory. These details are going to help us find some very bad people and make sure they can't hurt anyone else." A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. Judge Martinez entered, having stepped away from her other cases to check on Tommy. She carried something in her hands. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, placing a sandwich and chocolate milk in front of Tommy. "Heroes need to keep up their strength." Tommy's face brightened at the sight of his favorite comfort food. As he ate, the adults in the room discussed the next steps. Protective custody arrangements were made for Tommy and Lisa until the full scope of James' operation could be determined. "We'd already found evidence suggesting connections to criminal organizations in 3 states, Detective Chen explained quietly to Judge Martinez. "This could be the break we've been waiting for." Tommy finished his sandwich and looked up at his mother. "Can we go home now?" he asked, suddenly sounding very much like the 7-year-old boy he was. "Soon, sweetheart," Lisa promised. "The police need to make sure everything is safe first." Detective Chen nodded approvingly. "We'll have officers at your house tonight, just as a precaution. But Tommy's testimony and evidence have already led to several arrests. You should be very proud of your son, Mrs. Watson." Judge Martinez watched as Tommy returned to his drawings, this time sketching something happier: his mother's house, with the tree swing in the front yard and his dog, Max, playing in the garden. Sometimes, the judge mused, justice comes from the most unexpected sources. This young man may have done more to fight drug crime in Denver than years of police work. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, Tommy finally put down his markers. He had shared everything he could remember, every detail his young mind had stored away during those frightening weekends. The evidence he provided would continue to unfold in the days to come, but for now, he had done enough. Tommy Watson, the little boy who had been locked in a basement, had become the key to unlocking one of Denver's biggest criminal investigations. And this was just the beginning of how his brave actions would change lives. The following days unfolded like a whirlwind around Tommy and his mother. Their home, a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street, had become a temporary command center for the ongoing investigation. Detective Chen and her team worked tirelessly, piecing together the extensive criminal network that Tommy had helped uncover. On this particular morning, 4 days after the courthouse revelation, Tommy sat at his kitchen table eating breakfast while 2 police officers stood guard outside. The local news played quietly on the living room TV, where reporters were discussing what they called the unprecedented Watson case. "Mom," Tommy asked, pushing his cereal bowl aside, "when can I go back to school? I miss my friends." Lisa, who had taken emergency leave from her nursing job, smiled sadly at her son. "Soon, honey. Detective Chen says we just need to wait a few more days until everything is safer." The doorbell rang, causing both of them to jump. One of the officers entered, escorting Detective Chen and a man Tommy hadn't met before. "Good morning, Tommy," Detective Chen said warmly. "This is Agent Roberts from the FBI. He's very impressed with how you helped us." Agent Roberts knelt down to Tommy's level, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thanks to your information, we made 15 arrests last night. Your father's friends had connections to some very dangerous people, but they can't hurt anyone anymore." Tommy nodded solemnly, clutching the baseball cap that had become his constant companion. "Did you find the glowing boxes?" he asked. "We did," Agent Roberts confirmed. "Those boxes contained tracking devices for their shipments. Your drawings helped us locate all of them. Lisa listened intently as the agents explained the extent of what they discovered. James Watson's operation had been part of a sophisticated drug trafficking network spanning multiple states. The basement Tommy had been locked in served as a central distribution point, carefully hidden in plain sight in a suburban neighborhood. Mrs. Watson, Detective Chen said, turning to Lisa, "We've secured the area enough that Tommy can return to school tomorrow. We'll have plainclothes officers nearby, but it's important for him to return to his normal routine." Tommy's face lit up at this news. His mother, however, looked concerned. "Are you sure it's safe? What about James' associates who haven't been caught?" "The main players are in custody," Agent Roberts assured her. "James Watson is cooperating with authorities in exchange for consideration during sentencing. He's provided names, locations, everything." Tommy listened quietly, picking at the edge of his placemat. Despite his young age, he understood that his father would be going to prison for a long time. The feeling was complicated, a mixture of sadness, relief, and something else he couldn't quite name. "There's something else," Detective Chen said, pulling out an official-looking letter. "The governor wants to present Tommy with a special civilian bravery award. His actions have helped shut down one of the largest drug operations in Colorado's history." Lisa's eyes welled with tears of pride, but Tommy seemed overwhelmed by the attention. "I just didn't want to be locked in the basement anymore," he said softly. Agent Roberts placed a gentle hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Sometimes the bravest things we do start with just wanting to make something bad stop. You did the right thing, and you did it very smartly." The rest of the morning was spent discussing security arrangements for Tommy's return to school. His second-grade teacher had been briefed, and a support counselor would be available if he needed to talk. As the agents prepared to leave, Tommy suddenly spoke up. "What about Max?" he asked, referring to the dog at his father's house. "Is he okay?" Detective Chen smiled. "Max is fine. He's been taken to a special shelter, but..." She looked at Lisa questioningly. "Yes," Lisa said quickly, reading her son's expression. "We can bring him here. This house could use a good guard dog." For the first time in days, Tommy's smile reached his eyes. The thought of having Max with them, of returning to school, of not having to keep secrets anymore, it all felt like stepping into sunlight after a long time in darkness. As the agents left and the house settled back into its temporary normal, Tommy went to his room and pulled out his favorite book. The world outside was still complicated, still filled with police officers and investigations, but in this moment, he was just a 7-year-old boy looking forward to seeing his friends and his dog. The worst storms were passing, and clearer skies lay ahead. 1 week after Tommy's return to school, the impact of his bravery continued to ripple through Denver's law enforcement community. Inside the Denver Police Department's main conference room, Detective Chen stood before a wall covered with photos and connection charts, briefing the Joint Task Force on their progress. "Thanks to Tommy Watson's evidence, we've uncovered operations in Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico," she explained, pointing to various locations on the map. 17 more arrests were made yesterday, including 2 corrupt Border Patrol agents who were on James Watson's payroll. The room buzzed with activity as federal agents and local police worked together, following leads that stemmed from Tommy's photographs and detailed descriptions. His child's eye view of the operation had provided insights that years of surveillance had missed. Meanwhile, at Franklin Elementary School, Tommy sat in his second-grade classroom, trying to focus on his math problems. His classmates had welcomed him back warmly, though they didn't know the full story. The school had simply said he'd helped the police solve an important case. Ms. Rodriguez, his teacher, watched him with quiet admiration. She noticed a change in him. Gone was the anxious boy who jumped at loud noises. In his place was a more confident child who smiled more easily and participated in class discussions. During recess, Tommy played with his friends while Officer Sarah, dressed in casual clothes, watched from a nearby bench. The protection detail had become less obvious, but remained vigilant. Max, his father's former guard dog, now waited faithfully at home, making both Tommy and his mother feel safer at night. Back at the police station, Lisa Watson met with prosecutors to prepare for James's upcoming trial. Her ex-husband had pleaded guilty to multiple charges, hoping for a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation. "Your son's testimony won't be necessary for the trial," the prosecutor explained gently. Mr. Watson's confession and the evidence we recovered is more than sufficient. Tommy can focus on being a child again. Lisa wiped away tears of relief. He's been through so much. Last night, he finally slept through the whole night without nightmares. That afternoon, as Tommy walked home from school with his mother and their plainclothes escort, they passed his father's old house. Police tape still crossed the front door, and investigators continued to process evidence from the basement laboratory. Tommy squeezed his mother's hand but didn't look away. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, "do you think the other kids whose parents were arrested are okay?" Lisa's heart swelled with pride at her son's compassion. "The police are making sure all the families get help," she assured him. "Detective Chen told me they're working with social services to support everyone affected." At home, Max greeted them with enthusiastic barks and wagging tail. Tommy spent the afternoon doing homework and playing with his dog, almost like any normal second grader. But on his desk lay an invitation to the governor's mansion, where he would soon receive his Civilian Bravery Award. The evening news continued to cover developments in the case. Sources say the Watson investigation has led to the largest drug bust in Colorado history, the anchor reported. Over $50 million in illegal substances have been seized, along with evidence of money laundering through legitimate businesses. Lisa turned off the TV, preferring to focus on their healing process. She watched Tommy reading to Max on the living room floor, marveling at her son's resilience. The child psychologist they'd been seeing had praised Tommy's ability to process his experiences in healthy ways. Detective Chen had told her something remarkable earlier that day. Other law enforcement agencies were developing new protocols for interviewing children based on their experience with Tommy. His detailed observations and careful documentation with the phone camera had shown them the value of seeing criminal operations through a child's eyes. As the sun set over their quiet street, Tommy and his mother sat on their front porch swing, enjoying the peaceful evening. The police car parked discreetly down the block felt less like a reminder of danger and more like a symbol of protection. "Mom," Tommy said, petting Max's head, "I'm glad I told the truth." Lisa pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The truth Tommy had revealed was still creating waves, but here on their porch, mother and son had found their own pocket of peace. 1 year after the courthouse revelation, Tommy Watson sat in his third-grade classroom, listening to Officer Sarah give a special presentation about safety and courage. She had become a regular visitor to Franklin Elementary, developing a program that helped children understand the importance of speaking up about dangerous situations. "Sometimes heroes come in all sizes," Officer Sarah said, smiling at Tommy. The other students didn't know the full extent of his story, but they knew he had helped the police solve a big case. Tommy had become known as the kid who wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. During recess, Tommy played baseball with his friends, his trusted cap still on his head, though he no longer needed it for comfort. Max waited faithfully at home, where the police protection detail had finally been removed 3 months ago. The last members of his father's drug network had been sentenced, and the danger had passed. Lisa Watson had been promoted at the hospital, now working as the head nurse in the pediatric unit. Her experiences with Tommy had given her a special insight into helping children cope with trauma, and she had become an advocate for families affected by similar situations. That afternoon, Detective Chen visited their home with some news. She sat at their kitchen table, where Tommy was doing his homework while Max lounged at his feet. "The programs we developed based on your case have helped us solve 3 more major cases," she explained. "Other children have come forward with evidence, using their phones to document suspicious activities. They said they got the idea from hearing about you, Tommy." Tommy looked up from his math problems, a small smile crossing his face. "Are those kids safe now?" he asked, showing the same concern for others that had touched so many hearts. "Yes, they are," Detective Chen assured him. "And there's something else. The governor has approved funding for a new youth protection program. They want to call it the Watson Initiative." Lisa watched her son absorb this news. The frightened little boy who had once hidden his secrets was now helping create change throughout the state. The program would train police officers, teachers, and counselors to better recognize and respond to children living in dangerous situations. Later that evening, Tommy attended his weekly support group for children affected by similar circumstances. He had become something of a mentor to the younger kids, showing them that it was possible to move past their fears and find happiness again. "My dad's in jail too," he told a newly arrived 6-year-old girl who was struggling to adjust. "But that doesn't mean we did anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and it's okay for us to tell someone about it." James Watson, serving his 15-year sentence, had attempted to contact Tommy several times through his lawyer, but Tommy wasn't ready for that yet. His therapist had helped him understand that healing happened at its own pace, and it was okay to take all the time he needed. As the sun set over Denver that evening, Tommy and his mother sat on their porch swing, a tradition they had maintained through all the changes of the past year. Max lay at their feet, ever vigilant but relaxed. "Mom," Tommy said, watching the colors change in the sky, "remember when I was scared to tell what was happening at Dad's house?" "I do, sweetheart," Lisa replied, pulling him close. "I'm glad I was scared but did it anyway," he said thoughtfully, "because being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." Lisa kissed the top of his head, marveling at her son's wisdom. The Watson case had changed laws, created new programs, and helped countless families. But perhaps its greatest impact was on one small boy who had found his courage in the darkest of places. As night fell over their peaceful neighborhood, Tommy Watson was no longer defined by his father's crimes or the secrets he had kept. He was simply a third grader who liked baseball, played with his dog, and happened to have helped make the world a little bit safer for other kids like him. His story had become more than just a courthouse revelation. It had become a beacon of hope, showing that even the smallest voice could create the biggest changes, and that true courage often came from the most unexpected places. The end. 2 months after Tommy's courthouse revelation, the governor's mansion was prepared for a special ceremony. The grand ballroom had been transformed into a venue for what the press was calling the Watson Case Recognition Ceremony. Law enforcement officials, politicians, and media representatives gathered to honor those who had helped bring down one of the region's largest drug operations. Tommy stood in front of a mirror in one of the mansion's side rooms, adjusting his new blue tie. His mother had bought him his first suit for the occasion, though he still wore his trusted baseball cap. Detective Chen had assured him he could keep it on during the ceremony if it made him feel more comfortable. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Lisa asked, smoothing down his collar. She looked elegant in a simple navy dress, finally showing signs of the peace that had been returning to their lives. The ceremony began with speeches from various officials. The governor spoke about courage coming in all sizes, while the DEA director detailed how Tommy's evidence had led to the seizure of over $60 million in drugs and assets. Tommy sat between his mother and Detective Chen, listening as the full impact of his actions was revealed to the public for the first time. Over 70 arrests have been made across 3 states. 6 corrupt law enforcement officials have been exposed. 3 drug manufacturing facilities have been shut down. Most importantly, 15 children have been removed from dangerous situations similar to Tommy's. And now, the governor announced, "I'd like to call forward our youngest ever recipient of the Colorado Civilian Bravery Award, Tommy Watson." The audience stood as Tommy walked to the podium, his small frame dwarfed by the grand surroundings. A special platform had been placed behind the microphone so he could reach it. "Tommy didn't just help us catch criminals," the governor continued. "He showed us that sometimes the most powerful acts of courage come from our children. His careful documentation and brave testimony have changed how we approach cases involving minors." The award itself was a golden medallion on a blue ribbon, which the governor carefully placed around Tommy's neck. Tommy looked out at the audience, spotting many familiar faces: Officer Sarah, who had watched over him at school, Agent Roberts, who had helped bring Max to his new home, and even his teacher, Ms. Rodriguez. When it was Tommy's turn to speak, his voice was clear and steady. "I just wanted to help other kids who might be scared like I was," he said simply. "And I want to thank my mom, the police, and my dog Max for helping me be brave." The ballroom erupted in applause, many eyes glistening with tears at his honest words. In the back of the room, several of the investigators who had worked the case nodded in approval. Tommy's testimony had led to new training programs for law enforcement, teaching them to take children's observations seriously. After the ceremony, at a small reception, Tommy was approached by a girl about his age. She was the daughter of another family affected by the drug ring, and her father had also been arrested. "Thank you," she said quietly. After they arrested my dad, I found out I wasn't the only one who had to keep secrets. Now I get to live with my grandma, and I'm not scared anymore. Tommy shared his cookie with her, and they talked about their dogs and favorite school subjects, finding normal childhood connections amid their shared experiences. Later that evening, as Tommy and his mother drove home with their police escort, Lisa noticed her son looking thoughtfully at his medallion. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I was scared to tell the truth at first," Tommy admitted. "But being scared and being brave can happen at the same time, right?" Lisa smiled at her son's wisdom. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right even when you are afraid." At home, Max greeted them with his usual enthusiasm. Tommy hung his medallion on his bedroom wall, right next to his school achievement certificates and a thank you letter from the police department. As he got ready for bed that night, Tommy Watson was no longer the frightened boy with a terrible secret. He had become something else, a symbol of hope and courage for other children living in fear, and a reminder that even the smallest voice can make the biggest difference.